Welcome back. And so let's begin with that voter intention survey report produced by YIAGA Africa and its partners. We began interrogating that report last week on the program. So we have another panel of a complete outlook, without INEC, which we hope will weigh in on the conversation in the coming days on the program. And so joining us this morning, we have the Africa Program Coordinator for YIAGA Africa, Mr. Ibrahim Farouk, who joins us from our Abuja studio. We have also Mr. Egbelola Martins, the National Publicity Secretary of the YPP, who's also in our Abuja studio, and not forgetting, of course, Mr. Bayomi Shogunle, the Commissioner of Police on Elections, who also joins us. So let's begin with Mr. Ibrahim Farouk to sort of do a refresher, very quick refresher for us on the high points of that report that we began looking at last week, before we now bring in other representatives of the electoral process that are on the panel. So, Mr. Farouk, over to you now. The high points of the report again.
Thank you so much for having me. The National Voting Intention Survey was carried out by YIAGA Africa together with NOI Polls. And it was a telephone survey that was carried out between the 1st and the 5th of December 2025 that sampled over 1,500 Nigerians just to find out, are they going to come out and vote in the 2027 general elections? And the data shows us, first and foremost, that there is a high intention by Nigerians. 77% of the respondents said that they are either likely or very highly likely to come out and vote in the 2027 general elections. However, 42% say that they fear that there may be violence and that would present a barrier for them. But we also saw some regional disparities when it comes to voting intentions. And we see that there are higher voting intentions in some of the northern regions, especially in the northwest and in the northeast. But then voting intentions are also lower in some of the southern regions, especially in the south-south and in the southeast. But there are also some other very interesting data sets that we see that would inform a lot of programming by different stakeholders, including civil society organizations, security agencies, political parties, and the media. Some of these include what are some of the things that can affect voter turnout. And for us in our elections, I think since 2007, voter turnout has steadily been declining. But the data shows us that if there is improved security, if there is an improvement of INEC logistics, and also if the quality of candidates for the general elections improves, we're going to see an increase in voter turnout. From our estimations, there would be close to 100 million Nigerians on the voters register at the conclusion of this continuous voter registration process. And if we can turn these intentions to have 77% of Nigerians on this survey who indicate that they want to come out and vote during the elections, if we can turn this intention into action, and this action is actually turning out to vote in the 2027 general elections, we would see an improvement in terms of legitimacy for our elections. Finally, maybe it's just to also speak about an interesting data set about what are some of the things that can also affect voting choices. We also see security featuring very strongly. We see economic conditions featuring very strongly, and also around the quality of candidates. Again, I think this speaks to different stakeholders in the electoral process, because when we talk about security, I think there's a job for our security agencies to do there. When we talk about economic conditions, also for elected officials who are in these positions to make a change, to ensure that there's a job to be done there, but also the quality of candidates, very important for political parties to consider that as well.
All right. Thank you for those high points. Let's now take it to the Commissioner for Police for Elections, Mr. Shogunle. And so we could even compare the outcome of this survey with the outcome of the Anambra governorship elections in 2025, where we saw a fair increase in the turnout of voters as against what was recorded in the last governorship elections prior to the 2025 governorship elections. So we have over 70% in this voter intention survey that intend to vote. They're committed to the voting process, and that's a good number, but their worry is about security. So that's on the one hand that I want you to speak to and provide assurances as to what the force will be doing to ensure that people can go out and vote. But there are other high points of the vote that will require the survey that will require the commitment of the force as well on, and that would be 46% of voters seeing the electoral process or politics, as the survey quotes it, as transactional. I'd like you to speak to those issues and the commitment of the force to addressing them.
Thank you very much. Good morning for having me. You know, the data from the survey are very interesting. And going specifically to what the Nigerian police force has been doing, I want to start with the duties of police, what is required by the police to do regarding election security management. And it all starts days, weeks, and months before the election. We do threat analysis, and we have an analysis of the likely things that would happen. What are the actors planning? Then we go ahead to prevent them from doing some of the unlawful or evil things that they plan to do. Then it goes to the actual election date, providing escort for INEC materials and staff, providing protection for materials that will be used for the election, providing adequate security at polling booths to enable people come out to cast their vote, and also providing adequate security at collation centers and when the results will be announced. Then this takes us to post-election, also managing the celebration of the results. And so far, so good. The Nigerian police force and other security agencies have been doing this perfectly. And those are part of the things that we saw that resulted in the high turnout of the Anambra governorship election in November of last year. This election has been adjudged to be one of the most peaceful, violent-free elections in the history of democracy in Nigeria. 0 violence incident was recorded during that election. And what were the things that were put in place? Just as I told you, we had, before the election, we had what we call clearance operations. People, based on the threat analysis, people or elements that have been found that are planning evil to prevent the election from going on peacefully, we removed them from circulation in lawful ways. We provided adequate security at polling units. And we saw, based on the security that was provided, we saw people calling their friends and family members to come to the polling unit to come and cast their votes. Another aspect I also want us to look at regarding this report is there is empirical evidence to show that we have more people coming to observe elections in polling units that are not voting. And most of these people are not registered voters. So if the data is saying that maybe 20% turnout, 30% turnout, and we have equal numbers of people at polling units who are not voting, then I think we should be looking on how to get this set of people into also participating in election by voting.
Honorable Commissioner, so let's move on to the YPP National Publicity Secretary. But I know that we're all in Anambra together. It was quite peaceful. In fact, one of the most peaceful, although there was an incident where somebody died, I think, in Urumba North, and was shot. I think the governor even confirmed it. But generally, it was adjudged very peaceful. The turnout was way better than the previous election. I just needed to put those facts out so that we have a complete picture of what played out in Anambra. Mr. Martins, let's come to you. And one of the things that I've seen in this report is how the responsibility is on everybody's shoulder to ensure that people come out to vote and people feel safe when they are voting. That is dimension number one. Dimension number two is election management itself, the entire process, to the point where people believe, because it feels like the average Nigerian doesn't believe that their votes count. And I would like you to speak to it, because now with all of the defections happening, for the record, this is not the first time defection is happening. This is not the first time a ruling party is having this super majority in terms of, say, governors of, I think the PDP had about 28 governors, but I think the APC has exceeded that. Now, the reason why I highlighted that very last point that I want you to speak to, because whatever we do as election stakeholders and people do not believe that their votes count, is just a waste of time. So, first and foremost, YIAGA has done a great work to say people are interested in voting. They've highlighted issues around trust, security, and the rest of them. So as a political party, one of the political parties in Nigeria, when you look at that particular report, what can be done to strengthen the people's confidence in the institution to be able to give us the kind of election that we need, such that when people lose, they just know that I didn't do a great job in winning the hearts of people, not that INEC was and police was used to subvert the vote of the people.
Okay, thank you so much, Geoffrey. Let me also join fellow stakeholders in also thanking YIAGA Africa for coming up with such a robust report. And I think it's left for all stakeholders who have been identified in that report to be able to do one or two things, within their powers to ensure that those recommendations are followed through. However, I want to say that, the notion that vote does not really count is to me, is laughable. Laughable in the sense that, and I stand to be corrected. If our votes do not really count, why do the politicians deem it fit to want to buy these votes, from citizens? Why suddenly vote buying, become an issue? And I think that all we should be looking at is the weaponization of poverty, of ignorance by the political class, to ensure that at the day of voting, all they do is to buy the votes of citizens. And I also want to put it out, clearly, that as political parties, our job is quite clear, is to be able to ensure that there is a transparent process by which we produce candidates that will vie, for elections. And at the same time, we also galvanize, citizens to be able to go out there and vote. And, it's incumbent upon the security agencies to also ensure that there's, safety in terms of, making sure that citizens are not afraid to be able to exercise their franchise. And once that is done, we will have a situation where citizens will be encouraged to be able to come out and, vote for the candidate of their choice. However, there's a caveat. Now, if these citizens come out, it is also incumbent upon the security agencies to ensure that there's nothing like vote buying. Now, if the security agencies cannot assure, that, then it becomes a problem, because at the end of the day, the kind of leaders we produce and we see are those who have successfully, bought their way, into office. Now, those leaders are responsible for the kind of policies that we have today. The system, whether we like it or not, has been heavily skewed against the political parties. since 1999 up to this time, because political parties that have been in power, specifically the PDP, that never made any effort to ensure that they build strong institutions, are today suffering for, on account of what they failed to do. Because if they had ensured that laws that are made to strengthen political parties, we will not, be in this current situation where we continue to see a situation where political parties are weakened by the law. Let me give a vivid example. In terms of the law on defection, how come when you say the lawmakers, if they defect, they automatically lose their seats? But you went on to put a clause that if there are issues in the political party, that he's got every right, to defect without any recourse. Now, the problem is this. The political class will always put something in that electoral laws that will ensure that they circumvent the system. Why can it not be that if you decamp from your political party, it doesn't matter whether there are issues in the political party, you automatically lose your seat? That, in a sense, will ensure that people sit in their political parties to be able to provide build the same political party to be able to provide viral opposition. So I want to say, yes, we know the fears of citizens, and it's not, it's not also, different from the fears of all stakeholders. And this time around, I'm not talking about stakeholders in power. I'm talking about stakeholders in the opposition. The fear, this trust deficit. Like the 2023 elections, there's this fear that, okay, how come nobody saw the system glitch? And the same thing we are saying, because that was also done deliberately. Because if it wasn't done deliberately, it would have been a matter of law. The law would have covered that transmission of election results from polling units to the IRF. So, all said and done, all we want to say is that citizens should be confident that their vote counts, but there are other adjoining factors which are not within their purview. It's beyond their control. It's about the political class coming together to say, what kind of Nigeria do we really want? Do we want a Nigeria that is sustainable, that will serve the interest of all, even if we are not in power, or just, skewing the system to be able to reach out to their short-term needs? Because power is transient and you will never be in power forever. So hence, we want to speak to those in power today to ensure that laws are made, laws that are sustainable to cater to the needs.
If I'm coming, Mr. Martin, I'll need to butt in here.
All stakeholders, including political parties, including judiciary, including the media, and all institutions that will help to strengthen, our electoral process.
All right, Mr. Martins, well said. Let me take it to Farouk. And I want the producer to keep that slide. What would drive voting choices in 2027? 21% saying security situation, 21% quality of candidates, 17% economic conditions, and then what was written here, Nigerians vote for candidate, not just parties. So individuals matter. Farouk, let's talk about what political parties can do based on this report to inspire people, especially the young persons, which the report looks at with youth paradox, saying that they are more active online than at the polling unit. They see voting as more transactional, while the senior citizens see it as a responsibility, and some of them are totally detached. They don't want to hear anything about governance. But policies of government is what is affecting us today and will affect us tomorrow and affected us yesterday. So let's talk about the culture of political parties in fielding the quality of candidates they should field to be able to inspire the young people essentially and everybody generally to be able to, for us to have the kind of election and the kind of leadership, because all we are saying here is about recruitment process, the threshold for recruitment. So right now, I hold the view, personal view all the way, that what drives politicians or holds them in political parties, either subservience to power or what I can call, their own ambition at the end of the day, beyond service to the people. We're not saying all are guilty. So from this data, what can be done? And how can political parties sieve their persons and their candidates or the people they are putting out to the public to be able to give us the kind of quality of people that we need? Because what we see are mostly people that are being recycled.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. And I think that it's very important to note that this is a one of its kind type of survey that YIAGA Africa has produced, because what the data has done, it has helped give us an insight into what goes on in the mind of a Nigerian when he or she goes to the polling unit to cast the ballots. And you can see there on the screen that the choices are the security situation, the quality of candidates, and economic conditions. But just to speak about the quality of candidates, like you mentioned, is that it starts with the political parties first and foremost. And we must ensure that every political party conducts free, fair, credible, democratic primaries, which is an internal party arrangement as part of the leadership selection process about who has access to the ballot, so to speak. A further analysis of this data would probably tell you that Nigerians are more concerned about candidates than they are about political parties. So it means political parties who present candidates who are competent, who are credible, who have character, stand a very high chance of winning elections in 2027. So our political parties, and across board, all the political parties, it is very important that the candidates that you're presenting for the 2027 general elections are candidates who can, represent the citizens in the different constituencies for which they are vying for these offices. Historically, we have seen where candidates have been imposed by different political parties, and it is not difficult to draw that straight line between candidate imposition and where you can see that governance has failed in terms of being able to deliver on its promise, especially by those who end up in electoral office who did not emerge from a process that ensured the best quality of candidates are presented at the ballot. If you read the report, it goes further in our recommendations, especially to political parties, talking about the quality of candidates. But we also have a recommendation for our friends in the media, also around investigative journalism and background checks on these candidates. Because if the political party tells you this is a candidate who has competence and character and capacity to deliver, our friends in the media also have a very important role, around investigative journalism, carrying out background checks, whether it is spotlighting them in the media around what are some of the things they've done in the past and some of their promises of what they will do when they get into office, to ensure that when a Nigerian goes to cast his or her vote in 2027, at the back of their mind, there's an assurance around the candidate that he or she is voting for, together with many of the other factors that we can see in the data, whether it comes to security and CP. Abayomi Shogunle has done an amazing job talking about what are some of the security plans that have been put in place previously and will be put in place in the future, but also around economic conditions that are on the mind of a voter when he or she goes to cast their vote in 2027.
Let me bring it back to the Commissioner for Elections, Mr. Shogunle. I know you had addressed the matter of security, but I'd like to double down on it, particularly because the off-cycle elections may be on a smaller scale of how to really assess the effort of the force in providing security during elections. Let's look at general elections, which are on a larger scale. Sometimes I believe the INEC guidelines for voter conduct varies from election year to election year. But there are some years where voters are encouraged to remain behind after casting their ballot such that they can protect their vote. Now, if security is a component that is informing the choices of whether voters choose to remain behind or not, then we're going to be looking at security on a larger scale and the performance of the force. So I'd like you to speak to that. But and during your last commentary, I doubt that you quite addressed the issue of voting seen as transactional during elections. And we also know that members of the force aid and abet these transactions during elections. So I'd like you to address the conduct of your officers on those two issues.
All right, thank you very much. Before I do that, it's also important I clear this point. The sad incident Geoffrey referred to, the homicide case in Anambra on the day of the election, has nothing to do with the election. It did not happen in any of the polling units or anywhere close to where the election took place. The victim of this sad incident was not on the ballot. So this incident has nothing, is not related to the election. And having said that, let me assure everyone that wants to come out to vote that everything needed to be done is being done to ensure your safety. And come out to vote, nothing would happen to you. As a matter of IGP Kayode Egbetokun, PhD NPM, he wants to ensure, or he wants to make sure that we have peaceful and credible election. And we have seen this happening since he came into office. The election security has significantly changed since the current IGP came into office. And we're going to see this through also to the general election in 2027. Regarding off-cycle election being on a smaller scale compared to general election, you know, there are lessons learned and there are best practices we take from off-cycle elections to the general elections. There are certain plans that we want to, there are certain theories that we want to experiment, which we start by using them during this off-cycle election. And we see them producing positive results. We take it to the general elections. Also, general elections are compartmentalized, as in they happen based on state level. So the same security you are giving in a state is the same security you are giving in another state at different times. Issue of election being transactional, even channels reported it. Law enforcement agents arresting people that were trying to buy votes this last Anambra elections. So we don't keep our eyes off it. And a lot is being done also regarding training of police officers for election duties, because election security is completely different from the day-to-day security provisions that the police provide to members of the public in ensuring safety of life and property. And just as I've said again, because we cannot throw away this figure of people that come out to polling units and they are not voting. We cannot throw that away. It is very, very important. We can't have this, we cannot have a conversation on this survey without factoring all these hundreds and thousands of people that also show up at polling units on the day of election. They are not registered voters, they are not voting. If there are security issues, would we still have that much number of people also coming out to polling units? So for everyone that wants to come out to vote, come out and vote. And if we say security issue is part of the choices that people that people consider before voting. Look at security operations that have been taking place since the end of last year. A lot of terrorist camps have been burnt, and a lot of terrorists have been taken out of circulation, you know, in their hundreds.
Yes.
This has been reported by channels as well. So we are seeing improved security situation in the country. It's not like what it used to be 10 years ago when the state of emergency was only limited to the northeast region. We have seen a lot of improvement, and we will continue to see improvement in the coming days.
If I may come in, Mr. Shogunle, as we begin to wind down, of course, we're not saying the needle has not been moved in one way or the other. We can't discountenance the effort of security agents. In fact, your optimism is what we want to be our reality, not just an optimism that is going to get better. But what I was talking about, the death that was recorded on that Saturday was confirmed by the governor. In fact, the report said that they stormed the voting center in Owerri Ezukala Ward 1 and shot the council, except after that there was more investigations done to say it wasn't connected to the election, but somebody died that day. But let me move to Mr. Martins. Mr. Martins, let's talk about what I saw in this report that is very troubling. Two things. The fragile trust in INEC. Just 45% of Nigerians have confidence in INEC based on the data sample size that was done. And 76% of Nigerians are unaware of the recent electoral reforms. That's even more troubling, that the document that guides the conduct of election, a lot of Nigerians are not aware, based on, let me put it in context, based on the sample size of what YIAGA Africa calls. So I want you to speak to the fragility of trust in institutions and the, what do you call now, people not being aware of the electoral amendment that is going on.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. And the issue of trust deficit between citizens and institutions is a age-long problem in this country. And it speaks to one thing, that there is a systemic failure which has led to a situation where citizens do not really trust institutions. However, the institutions, you know, put efforts to ensure that things change for the better. And most often than not, I think citizens should not be blamed. I want to believe the blame should rest, you know, at the doorstep of the political class, and I'll continue to maintain that, because how we want the citizens to react will only be complementary to whatever role the political class is willing to play. And we really do not have a political class that is willing, as far as I'm concerned right now, to commit class suicide in such a way that they begin to make laws that are sustainable, laws that are transparent, laws that are for the masses. And until we get to that point, there will always be this disconnect between citizens and institutions. And yes, citizens, you know, for them to trust INEC, especially because I think this came as a result of the outcome of the 2023 election. Because before the 2023 election, hopes were high. You know, people were galvanized to believe in the system, to believe in INEC. Now, this time around, there was going to be credible election. And whether we like it or not, yes, we can sit down and analyze the failure of INEC, but to a large extent, some things were done right. But what went wrong was also what I said earlier on, that there's always a loophole in our laws that the political class will always take advantage of, which was what they did in 2023. Because while we all believe that the issue of IREF, the beavers will help to address the high-scale, you know, malpractices in elections, yeah, to an extent it worked, because we saw a situation where the ruling party actually lost in Lagos. And you know, of course, the current president that is his own strong base. He actually lost. We saw like 5 governors losing Senate seats. And we saw, a new entrant into, in terms of being a presidential candidate, pulling good results in some states. And that will show that to an extent, the electoral law, that was, amended, gave us something that citizens could look up to, that at least there is a glimmer of hope. However, there wasn't that loophole that they put, not to make it a compulsory requirement of the law, that electronic transmission of result from the polling unit to the high ref is compulsory. And that was what the Supreme Court latched on to ensure that, even at the level of the judiciary, they had to work with what was presented before them. So what we can begin to do, in my own opinion, is for us to, yes, we are evolving. Let's continue to see what those loopholes we identified in 2023, let's ensure that they are amended. But I share the same feelings with most of the civil society, that we do not see this current National Assembly, giving the much needed attention to the current electoral amendment. And at the time they will end up doing it, I will foresee what happened in 2019 happening, where the president will tell you that it was too close to the election and he cannot sign. Those are the possibilities that we foresee. And on the area of enlightenment in terms of citizens not being aware, now we are all responsible, and it also goes back to what I said earlier on in terms of political parties deliberately being weakened, not to be able to function optimally. We can only function within the limit of the resources we have to be able to carry out sensitization programs, within the nooks and crannies of society, because it's incumbent on us as political parties to ensure that we enlighten voters to understand the revolution or changes that are taking place in, the electoral process. Yeah. Also is the responsibility, of course, of civil societies and INEC, but the responsibility falls on us more. But in a situation where you have political parties that, have been emptied, so to say, they are not as strong. Okay, look at what happened. Even a military dictator who understood how institutions are built. In 1993, during the 1993 election, we had just 2 political parties as at then, and it was funded by the government. Up to the 774 local governments that they had political party offices, SDP and NRC. All right. And what was the mission? They were there to be sensitizing citizens at the grassroots, selling their political ideology on why their political party should be the choice.
Absolutely,
but
Mr.
Today,
Martins.
Under a democratic government, we do not see any need to fund political parties, because we feel, why should political parties be funded? And it also went back to what I said earlier, because PDP, who would have ensured and made it a point of constitution that political parties are funded. And if you feel maybe probably the money will be a waste, how are civil societies funded? Civil society, the only reason a YIAGA Africa can carry out this task is because YIAGA Africa is being funded. Remove funding from YIAGA Africa and you've suffocated them. The oxygen is gone. And they won't be able to come out with such, a wonderful output. So what we are saying, in essence, is that political parties should be funded. If you feel you cannot trust them with the management of the funds, you can set criteria. You can, even if we are so mentally lazy as not to know how to do it, you can replicate what is being done in the civil society. You just you copy and paste, or you are meant to have peculiar characteristics.
Mr. Martins,
to ensure that for you to be able to access funding,
if I may
you must fulfill certain conditions.
If I may come in there, your point about funding certainly cannot be ignored. It's critical to the survival of political parties, at least for the functioning of the administrative organs. But more importantly, political parties are movement of ideas, are supposed to be, well, maybe not what obtains in our own political landscape. They're supposed to be movement of ideas beyond the movement of just persons making up those institutions. And so if they're being emptied on the level of political representation, but there are people who, should flock to those parties if those ideas are convincing enough. And so we should look at the level of representation at the grassroots level, where political parties are concerned, and ask more of those political parties. But as we wind down now, I'd like to take it to Mr. Shogunle and Mr. Farouk for their last words. Mr. Farouk, I'd like you to speak to us about recommendations on some of the high points that we have discussed here on the program going forward, especially as we approach the next set of off-cycle elections. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, for Mr. Shogunle, just a bit of a digression, but let me bring it to Mr. Farouk first of all, before I come to Mr. Shogunle.
Thank you so much, Bukola. I think that my colleague, the secretary from the YPP, spoke about the need for passage of the Electoral Act as quickly as possible. I was very happy when I saw CP Shogunle come into the studio today and he was holding a copy of the Electoral Act that was passed in 2022. And at the back of my mind, I said, I hope that the next time I see him, he would actually be holding a copy of the Electoral Act 2022 as amended, or the Electoral Act 2026. What this means for us is that as the National Assembly resumes today, after the long holiday that they have currently been on, is that priority for us as Nigerians is to ensure that the Electoral Act is passed, because we're just a few months away from the 2027 general elections. And while it may seem like we still have time, we actually do not have time. Like CP Shogunle said, with election security, it starts days, weeks, months before the actual election. It's the same thing with the electoral law that needs to be passed. If INEC needs to pass a notice for elections, we also need to know the legal framework that is guiding the 2027 elections, whether it is the 2022 Electoral Act or whether we're going to have a 2026 Electoral Act. Secondly, and very importantly, as we wind down, was a conversation around civic duty and how different generations see elections either as transactional, especially for younger people, or as a responsibility for older people, as the data has shown us. I also think that for each and every stakeholder in the electoral process, it's important that we build that sense of civic responsibility and that sense of civic duty. Our young people in Nigeria, especially the Gen Zs, make up one of the largest demographics that we have in this country. But unfortunately, the data shows us that while there's a lot of energy online, there is reluctance to actually translate this energy into action to go to the polls. Right. Each and every one of us as stakeholders in this process, from the FCT area council elections that are happening in February, from the off-cycle elections in Ekiti and Oshulu to be a litmus test leading up to the 2027 general elections, need to build that sense of civic duty and responsibility among younger people.
Indeed.
Whether this is through targeted voter education initiatives by civil society organizations, political parties, and the media, continuous engagement by our security agencies, especially the police, and those assurances that we receive that elections are going to be safe, and there is no need for any citizens to be afraid to go out and vote on elections day. We're very
everyone, elections are a multi-stakeholder responsibility. So everyone has their work cut out for them. We must anchor at this point. Pardon me, Mr. Shogunle, I may not be able to come to you with that last question. Perhaps I should just lay it to you as a charge for a call for a balance of the deployment of electoral, for security officers during election time, also to communities during non-election time, because we see the deployment of thousands of police officers to oversee elections, but there are many communities that are vulnerable that do not have police formations at all. So that's just a feedback. That would have been a question, but we must anchor at this point. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on the program. We've been talking with Mr. Ibrahim Farouk, Africa Program Coordinator for YIAGA Africa, We also have Mr. Egbeola Martins, the National Publicity Secretary of the YPP, and not forgetting Commissioner of Police on Elections, Mr. Bayomi Shogunle. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming through on this conversation. And so we'll take a moment now. When we return, we'll talk about some persons who are aggrieved about a certain process. But before we get to that, we'll head to Anambra before we get to those people who are petitioning the CBN about certain offer of appointments that never came through. So we'll take a moment now. When we return, we'll continue with the next leg of our conversation.